Colonel Emma Thompson adjusted her navy blazer as she walked through the busy corridors of Manchester Airport, at 52 years old. She carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 30 years of military service. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her posture was straight and proud. Today was one of the most important days of her life. Emma was travelling to London to receive the Distinguished Service Medal from the Queen herself. As one of the highest-ranking black female officers in the Royal Air Force, this honour meant everything to her. It represented decades of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication to her country. She had earned this recognition through countless missions, training programs, and years of leadership. The airport was crowded with travellers rushing to catch their flights. Emma moved through the crowd with purpose, her small carry-on bag rolling smoothly behind her. She had packed light for this trip, bringing only what she needed for the ceremony and a brief stay in London. Her dress uniform was carefully folded in her bag, ready for the special occasion. As she made her way toward the security checkpoint, Emma noticed the familiar feeling she had experienced many times before. Some of the airport staff were looking at her with curious, questioning eyes. Their glances lingered a bit too long, as if they were trying to figure out whether she really belonged in this place. Emma had learned to recognize these looks over the years. She had faced similar situations throughout her military career. When she first joined the Air Force as a young woman, some people doubted her abilities because of her race and gender. They questioned whether she was strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to serve alongside her male colleagues. But Emma had proven them wrong time and time again. The security area was busy with long lines of passengers waiting to be screened. Emma joined the queue, patiently waiting her turn. She watched as families with children, business travelers, and tourists all moved through the process. Everyone seemed focused on getting through security quickly so they could catch their flights. When it was finally Emma's turn, she stepped forward with confidence. She placed her military identification card on the counter next to her boarding pass. The card clearly showed her rank, her photo, and her years of service. It was official government identification that should have been more than enough to verify her identity. The security officer behind the counter was a young man named David. He appeared to be in his 20s, with short brown hair and a serious expression. David picked up Emma's identification card and boarding pass, but he barely looked at them. He glanced at the documents for just a few seconds before setting them aside. "Ma'am, you'll need to step aside for additional screening," David said in a curt, unfriendly tone. Emma felt a slight tightness in her chest, but she kept her voice calm and respectful. "Of course, officer. May I ask why I've been selected for additional screening?" David didn't give her a direct answer. Instead, he avoided her eyes and called over his supervisor, Claire. "I need you over here," he said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. A woman in her 40s approached them. Claire had blonde hair tied back in a ponytail and wore the same security uniform as David. She looked Emma up and down with suspicious eyes, as if she were examining a potential threat rather than a decorated military officer. Emma could feel the weight of other passengers' stares. Some people in line behind her were getting impatient, checking their watches and shifting their weight from foot to foot. Others seemed curious about what was happening, craning their necks to get a better view of the situation. As Claire and David whispered to each other, Emma was led to a separate area away from the main security line. This area was used for additional screening procedures, and being taken there made Emma feel singled out and embarrassed. She had traveled many times before, both for military duties and personal trips, but she had never been subjected to this kind of treatment. Standing in the separate screening area, Emma tried to remain composed. She understood that security procedures were important for everyone's safety, but something about this situation felt different. She had a strong feeling that she was being treated this way not because of any legitimate security concern, but because of how she looked. In that difficult moment, Emma remembered the wise words her grandmother had spoken to her many years ago. Her grandmother had been a strong woman who had faced her own challenges during a time when discrimination was even more common than it was today. "Child," her grandmother had said, "dignity isn't something they can give you or take away. It lives inside you, and it's yours to keep forever." Those words had guided Emma through many difficult situations in her life. They had helped her stay strong when she faced discrimination in the military, when she was passed over for promotions, and when people questioned her abilities. Now, standing in this airport security area, those words gave her strength once again. Emma took a deep breath and prepared herself for whatever would come next. She knew that her true character would be measured not by how others treated her, but by how she chose to respond to their treatment. Claire walked around Emma in a slow circle, studying her from head to toe like she was examining a suspicious package. Her eyes were cold and unfriendly, filled with doubt and mistrust. Emma stood perfectly still, maintaining her military posture despite the uncomfortable situation. "We need to verify your identity," Claire announced loudly. Even though Emma had already presented her military identification card twice, her voice carried across the security area, drawing even more attention from nearby passengers. Emma felt the eyes of strangers watching her, but she refused to let embarrassment show on her face. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, and she would not let that training fail her now. "I understand your procedures," she replied in a gentle, respectful tone. "Here are my credentials again." With steady hands, Emma reached into her small purse and pulled out her identification card, boarding pass, and military service record. She had brought the service record specifically for this ceremony in London, never imagining she would need it just to board a plane. The document showed her 30 years of faithful service, her numerous commendations, and her spotless record. Claire took the documents from Emma's hands but barely glanced at them. She flipped through the pages quickly, not bothering to read the detailed information about Emma's distinguished career. After just a few seconds, she set the papers aside dismissively. "Anyone can get fake papers these days," Claire muttered, under her breath, but loud enough for Emma to hear. "These could be forgeries for all we know." Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had dedicated her entire adult life to serving her country, protecting its citizens and upholding its values. Now she was being treated like a criminal simply for trying to board a plane. But she kept her voice calm and professional. "Ma'am, I'm a colonel in the Royal Air Force," Emma explained patiently. "I'm traveling to London to receive an honor from Her Majesty the Queen. Perhaps you could contact my commanding officer to verify my identity and credentials." Claire's face hardened even more. "That won't be necessary," she said sharply, cutting off Emma's suggestion. "We have our own procedures to follow here." She turned to another security officer, a man named James who had been watching the situation unfold. "James, call for a backup. We need to do a full search of this woman." James hesitated for a moment, looking uncomfortable with the request. He glanced at Emma's military identification card on the counter, then back at Claire. But he didn't question his supervisor's orders. He picked up his radio and called for additional security personnel. "Please remove your shoes and jacket," Claire commanded, pointing to a nearby bench. Emma's heart sank as she realized how far this situation was escalating. She had hoped that showing her credentials would be enough to clear up any misunderstanding. Instead, she was being treated with more suspicion than ever. But she maintained her composure and began to remove her shoes as requested. As Emma sat on the bench unlacing her comfortable walking shoes, she could hear the airport announcements echoing through the terminal. Her flight to London was Now boarding. In just 20 minutes, she began to worry that she might miss the ceremony she had worked so hard to attend. Other passengers in the security area were starting to notice the commotion. Some of them stopped what they were doing and stared openly at Emma. A few shook their heads in disapproval, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved in the situation. An elderly gentleman in line behind Emma stepped forward slightly. "Excuse me, but this seems unnecessary," he said quietly to Claire. "She's shown you her identification." Claire spun around to face him. "Sir, please mind your own business and stay in line. This is a security matter." The man frowned, but stepped back, not wanting to cause more trouble. Emma gave him a grateful look, appreciating his attempt to help even though it hadn't worked out. As 2 additional security officers arrived to assist with the search, Emma was subjected to a much more thorough examination than any other passenger she had seen that day. They checked every pocket of her blazer, examined her shoes inside and out, and went through her small purse item by item. During this humiliating process, Emma's mind wandered to the many young airmen and airwomen she had mentored throughout her career. She had worked with recruits from all backgrounds who had faced their own challenges and discrimination. Some had been doubted because of their race, others because of their gender, and still others because of their economic background. Emma had always given them the same advice when they encountered unfair treatment: rise above it. Show them who you really are through your actions, not your anger. Let your character speak louder than their prejudice. She had spoken these words countless times over the years. Believing deeply in their truth, she had seen young soldiers transform challenges into strength, using discrimination as motivation to prove their worth. Now, standing in this airport security area, Emma realized she had to follow her own advice. The search continued for several more minutes. Emma remained patient and cooperative, answering every question politely and following every instruction without complaint. She refused to let this treatment change who she was or compromise her values. As the final boarding call for our flight echoed through the terminal, Emma knew she was running out of time, but she also knew that how she handled this moment would define her character more than any medal or ceremony ever could. Officer James opened the door to a small, cramped room that felt more like a holding cell than a waiting area. The walls were plain white, and there were no windows except for a single glass panel in the door. The only furniture was a plastic chair and a small table. The room smelled of disinfectant and felt cold and unwelcoming. "Please sit here and wait," James said, his voice softer than Claire's but still official. "We're running additional background checks on your identification. This shouldn't take too long." Emma stepped into the room and heard the door close behind her with a soft click. She sat down in the plastic chair, which was uncomfortable and made a slight creaking sound under her weight. Her hands folded naturally in her lap, a habit she had developed during her many years of military training. Through the glass door, Emma could see the busy airport terminal. Travelers were walking back and forth, pulling their suitcases and carrying their bags. In the distance, she could see a flight gate. The boarding area was filling up with passengers. She watched as people lined up to get on the plane that was supposed to take her to London. The sight made her heart heavy. This was a flight that would take her to receive the highest honor of her career. She had been looking forward to this moment for months, ever since she had received the official letter from the palace. Now she was sitting in this small room, being treated like a criminal instead of a decorated officer. Emma closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She let her mind wander back to the beginning of her military career, when she was just 18 years old and full of dreams. She had been so excited to serve her country, so eager to prove that she could be just as good as anyone else. Her first day at the military academy had been both thrilling and terrifying. She had walked into the training facility wearing her new uniform, her head held high with pride, but her confidence had been shaken when one of the instructors, a stern-faced man with grey hair, had looked at her and said, "I don't think you belong here, girl. This isn't a place for your kind." Those words had stung deeply, but Emma had refused to let them break her spirit. She had worked twice as hard as everyone else, staying up late to study, practicing her drills until her muscles ached, and never complaining about the extra challenges she faced. Slowly, she had earned the respect of her fellow cadets and even some of the instructors years later. When she was eligible for her first major promotion, Emma had been devastated to learn that she had been passed over. A colleague had told her supervisor that she wasn't leadership material and that the men under her command wouldn't respect her authority. Emma had felt angry and discouraged. But she had channeled those feelings into determination. She had requested additional training, taken on extra responsibilities, and mentored younger recruits. When the next promotion opportunity came round, she was ready. This time, her achievements spoke louder than anyone's prejudices. Emma opened her eyes and looked round the small room again. She pulled out her phone and began to document everything that had happened. She carefully typed notes about the time she had arrived at security, the names of the officers who had detained her, and the exact words they had used. She recorded the time stamps and took photos of the room where she was being held. She wasn't doing this out of anger or a desire for revenge. Emma understood that her experience today was not unique. Many other people, especially those who looked like her, probably faced similar treatment when they traveled. If she could use her position and her story to help prevent this from happening to others, then perhaps some good could come from this difficult situation. Through the glass door, Emma watched as the last few passengers boarded her flight. The gate agent was making final announcements, and the boarding bridge was about to be pulled away from the plane. She felt a deep sadness as she realized that she was going to miss the ceremony she had worked so hard to attend. The plane began to move slowly away from the gate, and Emma watched it taxi toward the runway. 30 years of faithful service, countless missions, awards, and commendations. And she was still being judged by the color of her skin rather than the content of her character and her achievements. But Emma Thompson had not reached the rank of colonel by giving up when things got difficult. She had faced discrimination before, and she had always found a way to rise above it. This situation was no different. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Drawing on the inner strength that had carried her through 3 decades of military service, Emma knew that whatever happened next, she would face it with the same grace and dignity that had defined her entire career. She would not let this treatment change who she was or compromise her values. She would continue to be the person her grandmother had raised her to be, the officer her country had trusted her to become, and the role model that so many young people looked up to. The plane disappeared from view, taking with it her chance to receive the medal in person. But Emma knew that true honor came not from ceremonies or awards, but from how a person chose to respond when faced with injustice and adversity. Captain Robert Mitchell had been walking through the airport terminal when he noticed the commotion at the security checkpoint. As a pilot for British Airways, he often passed through this area on his way to flights, and he was familiar with the usual procedures. But something about what he was seeing made him stop and pay closer attention. Robert was a young man in his early 30s with kind eyes and a strong sense of justice. He had grown up in a family that taught him to speak up when he saw something wrong. His father had been a police officer who always said, "If you see injustice and do nothing, you become part of the problem." From where he stood, Robert could see a well-dressed black woman being treated very differently from other passengers. She carried herself with perfect posture and spoke in a calm, respectful manner that reminded him of the military officers he had known. There was something about her bearing that suggested she was someone important, someone who deserved respect. Robert watched as the woman was led away to a small room, and he felt his stomach tighten with concern. He had seen enough discrimination in his life to recognize it when he saw it. This situation didn't feel right to him, and he couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't witnessed it. He approached the security desk where David was now processing other passengers as if nothing unusual had happened. Robert waited patiently, in line until it was his turn to speak with the security officer. "Excuse me," Robert said politely, showing his pilot identification. "I'm Captain Mitchell with British Airways. I couldn't help but notice the lady you detained just now. May I ask what the reason was for the additional screening?" David looked up from his paperwork and shrugged casually. "Just following standard procedures, Captain. She looked suspicious, so we had to check her out more thoroughly." Robert frowned at this response. Suspicious how? She seemed very cooperative and well-dressed to me. "You never know these days," David replied vaguely. "People can look one way and be something completely different." Robert felt his concern growing stronger. "May I see her identification documents?" "As a pilot, I'm trained to recognize proper identification, and I might be able to help verify if there's any question about their authenticity." David hesitated for a moment, then pulled out Emma's military identification card from a folder on his desk. He handed it to Robert, expecting the pilot to glance at it quickly and move on. But when Robert looked at the identification card, his eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He immediately recognized the insignia and rank displayed on the card. This was not just any military identification. This belonged to a colonel in the Royal Air Force, one of the highest-ranking officers in the service. "Do you realize who this is?" Robert asked David urgently. "This is a colonel in the Royal Air Force. This is someone who has dedicated their entire career to serving our country." David looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Well, anyone can get fake papers these days," he said weakly, repeating what Claire had said earlier. Robert studied the identification card more carefully. It looked completely authentic to him, with official seals, proper formatting and security, features that would be extremely difficult to fake. But more importantly, he noticed that the card included contact information for Emma's commanding officer. "I'm going to make a phone call," Robert announced, pulling out his mobile phone. "If there's any doubt about this officer's identity, her commanding officer can verify it immediately, without waiting for David's permission." Robert dialed the number listed on the identification card. The phone rang several times before a stern voice answered. "This is General Harrison, sir. This is Captain Robert Mitchell with British Airways," Robert said respectfully. "I'm calling from Manchester Airport because I believe one of your officers has been wrongfully detained by security. Her name is Colonel Emma Thompson." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then General Harrison's voice became very serious. "Colonel Thompson is one of our most distinguished officers. She's traveling to London today to receive the Distinguished Service Medal from Her Majesty." "Why has she been detained?" Robert explained the situation as quickly as he could, describing how Emma had been singled out for additional screening and was now being held in a small room. He could hear the anger building in the general's voice as he spoke. "This is completely unacceptable," General Harrison said firmly. "I'm calling the airport manager immediately. Colonel Thompson should be released and given a full apology." Within minutes of Robert's phone call, things began to change rapidly. General Harrison contacted the airport's main office, and soon senior managers were rushing to the security area. At the same time, Several passengers who had witnessed Emma's treatment and filmed parts of it on their phones had contacted local news stations. News reporters began gathering outside the airport. Having heard about the incident through social media posts and passenger testimonials, the story was spreading quickly, and the airport administration knew they had to act fast to address the situation. Helen Davies, the airport manager, was a middle-aged woman with graying hair who had worked in aviation for over 20 years. She had never encountered a situation quite like this, and she was deeply concerned about the potential consequences for the airport's reputation. She rushed to the small detention room where Emma was still waiting patiently. Helen knocked on the door and entered quickly, her face showing genuine concern and embarrassment. "Colonel Thompson, I am Helen Davies, the airport manager," she said breathlessly. "I am deeply sorry for this terrible misunderstanding. Please accept our sincerest apologies for the way you have been treated today." Emma looked up at Helen with calm, steady eyes. Her expression showed no anger or bitterness, only the quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "The apology is appreciated, Mrs. Davies," Emma said softly. "But this isn't about me anymore. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to others." 3 days after the incident at Manchester Airport, Emma Thompson stood in front of a large conference room filled with reporters, cameras, and bright lights. She had been invited to give a press conference about what had happened to her, and news outlets from across the country had sent their best journalists to cover the story. Emma wore her military dress uniform for the first time since the airport incident. The dark blue fabric was perfectly pressed, and her medals gleamed under the camera lights. She stood tall and straight at the podium, her hands resting calmly on the wooden surface as she looked out at the crowd of reporters. Many people in Emma's position might have used this moment to demand justice, to call for resignations, or to announce lawsuits against the airport. The lawyers who had contacted her over the past few days had assured her that she had a strong case and could receive significant compensation for the humiliation she had endured. But Emma had spent the last 3 days thinking carefully about what she wanted to say and what she hoped to accomplish. She had prayed, meditated, and consulted with her family and close friends. In the end, she had decided to take a different path than most people would expect. "I'm not here seeking revenge," Emma began, her voice warm but strong enough to carry it to the back of the room. "I'm here because I believe in the power of change. What happened to me at Manchester Airport happens to countless others every day. People who are judged by their appearance rather than their character." The reporters leaned forward in their seats, surprised by Emma's calm and forgiving tone. They had expected anger, demands for punishment, or emotional outbursts instead. They were hearing something much more powerful, a message of hope and transformation. Emma continued speaking, her words carefully chosen and delivered with the confidence of someone who had made peace with her experience. "I could be angry, and I could seek to punish those who treated me unfairly. But anger and punishment don't create lasting change. Education and understanding do." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before making her major announcement. "That's why I'm creating the Dignity Foundation, an organization dedicated to training security personnel and educating the public about unconscious bias. We will work with airports, schools, and businesses to help people recognize and overcome their prejudices." The room erupted with questions from reporters, but Emma raised her hand gently to continue. "The foundation will provide workshops, training, materials, and support systems to help people treat each other with respect and dignity, regardless of race, gender, age, or appearance." Within hours of Emma's press conference, Manchester Airport announced that they would be implementing new policies and mandatory diversity training for all security personnel. The airport's management had been working round the clock to address the situation and prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Claire and David, the two security officers who had detained Emma, were not fired as many people expected. Instead, they were enrolled as the first participants in the new training program. At first, they were defensive and resistant to the idea that they had done anything wrong. But as they participated in the workshops and listened to stories from other people who had experienced discrimination, both Claire and David began to understand the impact of their actions. They realized that their unconscious biases had caused real harm to someone who had dedicated her life to serving others. Over the following months, both officers became strong advocates for fair treatment of all passengers. They shared their own stories of transformation and helped train other security personnel. Their willingness to learn and change became an inspiration to their colleagues. A week after the press conference, Emma finally received a distinguished service medal from the Queen. The ceremony took place at Buckingham Palace, and it was attended by high-ranking military officials, government leaders, and Emma's family and friends. But what made Emma most proud were not the dignitaries in attendance, but the hundreds of letters she had received from young people across the country. Students, young professionals, and military recruits had written to tell her that her story had inspired them to stand up for what's right and to treat others with dignity and respect. During the medal ceremony, Emma was invited to speak to the gathered crowd. She stood at the podium in the Grand Palace Hall, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "True strength isn't about avoiding challenges," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate room. "It's about rising above them with integrity. When we choose dignity over anger, understanding over hatred, we don't just change ourselves, we change the world." The audience gave Emma a standing ovation that lasted for all minutes. Many people in the room had tears in their eyes as they listened to her words of wisdom and forgiveness. 6 months later, airports across the country had adopted what became known as the Thompson Protocol, a comprehensive system designed to ensure fair and respectful treatment for all travelers. The protocol included new training procedures, oversight mechanisms, and clear guidelines for security personnel. Emma continued her military service for 2 more years before retiring with full honors. During her retirement, she devoted herself full-time to the Dignity Foundation. She traveled to schools, businesses, and organizations across the country, sharing her story and teaching others about the importance of treating everyone with respect. Years later, when people asked Emma about the airport incident, she would smile and say, "That difficult moment became the beginning of something beautiful. It taught me that our greatest victories come not from fighting our enemies, but from transforming them into allies." The end.